cash. One of them was self-made Texas billionaire and former presidential candidate Ross Perot. He saw how wounded Jobs had been by Apple.
I think it was first a tremendous disappointment, which I can certainly understand. Secondly, he picked himself up, dusted himself off, and started all over again with very little hesitation. And I really admired that. You know, otherwise you could just sit around in a dark room and sulk about it, but that's not Steve.
Steve started a company called Next to do a computer that was going to be what he thought Apple should have been, to aim it at the education market because Apple had had conspicuous success in education. There were some people he could steal from Apple to market to that segment, and he thought starting small made sense.
But even starting small needs big money.
I invested $20 million in Next. He contacted me, asked me to be a principal investor and to serve on the board with him, and I agreed to do it just because of my support for him. And there's no question in my mind that if he wanted to do it, it would get done. He's great with attracting and motivating the best of the best people. He's great at encouraging them to be creative and come up with new ideas and not just be little robots, which many big companies just want you to be a little robot and do what you're told to do, and the last thing they want to hear from you is a creative idea. Steve loved those creative ideas, and that was a magic part of the success of Next.
A new Steve Jobs was rising out of the ashes of the boardroom battle at Apple. And this time, he was ruthless.
He invested $5 million capital in a corporation called Pixar, and he took 70% of the company, and the employees took 30%. Steve kept investing because we would run out of money, and he did not want to be embarrassed by a failure after having been booted out of Apple, so he would put more money in and take more equity away from the employees. So over the course of about 4 or 5 years, he owned it all.
Alvey quickly felt he was losing control to the new master.
I would look at my employees, looking at Steve, and I realized they're in love. You know, they're just looking up at him with big doe eyes, just soaking in everything he's saying as if it's truth. And it wasn't. So you can see he was very disruptive. Our management style was to be 2 hours away from him, try not to have him come into the building.
Standing up to Jobs could be a painful experience, as Alvey found out in one memorable boardroom meeting.
He turned on me, total street bully, in my face, screamed. And I went crazy. I'd never been there. I don't ever want to be there again. That's kind of why, that's the reason I got away from him. We were screaming at each other in full bull rage, with our faces about that far apart. And during that, so he was insulting my Southwestern accent. It was just street bully stuff. I still don't know what happened. Something broke. And during this face-off, literally a face-off, I marched past him and wrote on the whiteboard. Now, it was an unspoken rule, which I hate, unspoken rules, that only he could sit in front of the whiteboard and only he could use it. Nobody had ever tested it, but at this point I tested it. I marched past him and wrote on the whiteboard. He said, you can't do that. And I said, what, write on a whiteboard? And he stormed out of the room. So that was and then I was in shock for the next week or months or so. I just didn't know what had happened, you know.
Everyone in Steve Jobs' life went through 3 phases. They were either being seduced, ignored, or scourged. And it all depended upon whether he needed you or not. If he needed you, he was your best friend, and he would seduce you. And then you would work like a dog, and if you weren't working hard enough, he would scourge you, and ultimately he would throw you away.
On the personal level, it was not fun. It was not the way I want to be treated by another human being.
Steve ultimately betrayed everyone.
And some said the new Steve Jobs wasn't afraid of claiming all the credit, too.
Disney took Toy Story and another one of their movies to New York for the critics to see. And the critics they didn't even look at the other movie. They just went nuts when they saw Toy Story. And they came back and basically told Steve that it was going to be a huge success. And that's the point when his ability to see something spectacular is about to happen, he just moved in and exploited that right to the hilt. And I must say, he did a great job. He became a billionaire from it. Awesome. So Steve's genius is to move when he has a good idea. I don't think they are necessarily his ideas, but boy, does he know how to move and market them like crazy. He's the world's genius marketeer, including of his own self-image.
But the best was yet to come for Jobs. Apple was in trouble. They wanted him back.
They were begging him to come back because they knew he could fix it. And he did come back, and he fixed it, and the rest is history.
One man who witnessed Jobs' return to Apple was friend Walt Mossberg.
He came back to Apple, and the company was almost dead. Literally, it was like 90 days from going bankrupt. He said to the people at this very demoralized, almost out of business company, we're not looking backward. I don't really care that we once had the first successful personal computer. I really don't care that we were famous and successful. We're not anymore, and this is where we're starting from, and this is where we're moving.
And so when you see the second coming of Steve Jobs in Apple, Apple went from being just a wide open, wacky company to being a very disciplined company that understood its financials at a level that few companies do. And that's because Steve thought of every dollar as being his every dollar.
That they have resolved these differences in a very, very...
It was an investment from Bill Gates that ultimately helped to save Apple. But when Gates made a live appearance with Jobs to explain the deal, it didn't go down well with the loyal Apple audience.
Bill Gates was actually on stage rescuing Apple. Rescuing Apple. He did two things. He gave them $150 million, for which he got non-voting stock that expired after a certain number of years. And he promised to keep producing Microsoft Office, the Macintosh version, for, I think, 5 years. And so he was on stage rescuing Apple. And yet the acolytes who were filling the room had learned to hate him. They treated him as, you know, the devil, the Antichrist, and they booed him.
But Jobs, with his eye ever on the bottom line, had a different view.
There were too many people at Apple and in the Apple ecosystem playing the game of, for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. And it was clear that you didn't have to play that game, because Apple wasn't going to beat Microsoft. Apple didn't have to beat Microsoft. Apple had to remember who Apple was. It was just crazy what was happening at that time, and Apple was very weak. And so I called Bill up, and we tried to patch things up.
I think he learned to be a better businessman. I think he learned a little more humility.
Steve really changed in a number of ways, and he changed primarily because of failure. Failure affected him, and he learned from it.
Jobs created a brand new product at Apple, the iMac.
I think there was a decision to look different. Remember their motto immediately after his return was "Think different." And, you know, he didn't say that because he didn't believe it. You know, he really did want to think different, and they would have to appear different to show that they were thinking different.
The pair joked about the relationship between Mac man Jobs and PC man Bill Gates.
PC guy is great.
I like PC.
He's got a big heart.
His mother loves him.
His mother loves him. PC guy is what makes it all work, actually.
Yeah.
All right.
It's worth thinking about.
The truth about Bill Gates is a brilliant man who you could, and I did, have talked to for long periods about the future. He could think quite intelligently about the future, but the way Microsoft worked as a business was far more incremental than Apple. All the while they were working on some big leap, and Microsoft tended to do the incremental stuff almost all the time.
What Steve's done is quite phenomenal. His ability to always come around and figure out where that next bet should be has been phenomenal. You know, Apple literally was failing when Steve went back and reinfused the innovation and risk-taking that have been phenomenal. So the industry's benefited immensely from his work. We've both been lucky to be part of it, but I'd say he's contributed as much as anyone.
I think he built the first software company before anybody really in our industry knew what a software company was, except for these guys. And that was huge.
Bill Gates is a brilliant man. He did a lot for the world in technology, and he is now doing a lot for the world in philanthropy, and I think highly of Bill Gates. But of the two of them, the one that took the bigger risks and changed the game more often, it was Steve. It was Steve Jobs.
Well, I'd give a lot to have Steve's taste. He has natural, not a joke at all. I think in terms of intuitive taste, both for people and products, the way he does things, it's just different. And I think it's magical.
Despite their rivalry, in this joint appearance after Jobs had been diagnosed with cancer, they displayed a healthy respect and even affection for one another.
I think of most things in life as either a Bob Dylan or a Beatles song. But there's that one line in that one Beatles song, you and I have memories longer than the road that stretches out ahead. And that's clearly true here.
Well, you know what? I think we should end it there. It was one of the highlights of my journalistic career to be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
In fact, we were quite taken aback by the standing ovation and seeing some of the people from where we were sitting on stage actually shedding tears. It sounds strange, but it was actually an emotional thing.
So I can move this with just a touch anywhere I want.
Steve Jobs, now at the peak of his creative genius, was leading Apple to the peak of its creative success.
The key to the success of the company was in moving beyond the computer, was in seeing how the microprocessor was getting so cheap that it could be applied to other consumer electronic devices.
Innovative new products poured in a seemingly endless stream from Apple's development laboratories, pouring a stream of cash into Apple's coffers.
250 million or a billion or however many iPods are out there, are what built the Apple of today, not the Mac.
Approaching the age of 50, barely a quarter of a century after making his first million greenbacks, Jobs was worth $2.3 billion. Now, he picked up the pace of Apple's evolution. Computers, they were yesterday's news. He was conquering the world of music.
Great new products.
Jobs was hurting his competitors.
iTunes pretty well killed off the music store, and Virgin Megastores, slowly been disappearing around the world.
500,000 songs are downloaded on iTunes every day. In many cases, changing artists' lives. Hip-hop group The Black Eyed Peas were asked to star in an iTunes commercial. They later became the most downloaded band on iTunes. But at the time, they didn't understand this new cultural phenomenon.
They said, hey, they want to use a Black Eyed Peas song for an iTunes commercial. And I said, well, what's iTunes? And they said, they're not paying much, but they're going to give you guys iPods. What's an iPod?
This is the new iPod Nano.
But Jobs' influence on the music industry went far beyond simple star making.
Way before iTunes, Steve Jobs has been a part of music because every major studio has a Mac computer in it. I mean, the Mac computer is an artist's computer. Musicians are still important, but people like Steve Jobs are uber important.
They bought CDs and they want to buy downloads. People don't want to rent their music.
Life in Apple's orchard had never been more fruitful. Then, Steve Jobs learned he had cancer.